First, like this video, hit subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. The biting wind howls through the narrow slits of a medieval castle, rattling shutters that, even in their tightly closed state, offer little resistance. Frost paints intricate patterns on the stone walls within, and the very air feels heavy with the chill of deep winter. Here, in the heart of a European fortress in the 12th century, a fundamental question arises. How did its inhabitants, from the lord to the lowest sentinel, survive the relentless embrace of the cold night? Contrary to popular romantic notions, medieval castles, especially during the early and high medieval periods, roughly 10th to 13th centuries, were not bastions of warmth and comfort, particularly in their deepest winter months. Archaeological evidence from sites like Castle Rising in Norfolk, England, or Chateau Gaillard in Normandy reveals thick, uninsulated stone walls, often exceeding 3 meters in places. These formidable structures, built primarily for defense, acted as massive thermal sinks, absorbing any ambient heat and radiating cold. Extensive studies by historical architectural experts, such as Dr. Peter H. Smith of the University of Cambridge, confirm that the thermal conductivity of limestone and granite, common building materials, meant that internal temperatures often mirrored or were only marginally higher than external temperatures during prolonged cold snaps. Imagine standing in the great hall of Warwick Castle in December, the cold permeating your very bones, exacerbated by the sheer volume of the space. The concept of efficient heating systems, as we understand them today, was largely absent. Fireplaces, while present, were often rudimentary. Early designs featured wide, shallow hearths, frequently with a simple opening directly into the wall, offering minimal draw and losing significant heat up the chimney. Dr. Margaret Wade Labarge, a renowned medieval historian, noted that the majority of heat generated by an open fire was lost through the flue, with only a small fraction radiating into the room. Furthermore, fuel was a constant concern. Wood, the primary heat source, was a precious commodity, requiring vast tracts of forest and significant labor to fell, transport, and properly season. A typical castle might consume several cords of wood per day during winter, placing considerable strain on its surrounding resources. This scarcity meant that heating was often restricted to communal areas or the lord's private chambers, leaving most inhabitants to contend with the relentless cold. The deceptive glow of the hearth, a central feature of any medieval great hall or chamber, offered a psychological comfort that often belied its actual heating efficiency. While a roaring fire might cast dancing shadows and chase away the immediate chill from those directly beside it, its warmth struggled to permeate the vast, high-ceiling spaces of a stone castle. Consider the thermal dynamics at play. As documented by Professor G.R. Evans from the University of Cambridge, a leading authority on medieval social history, the radiant heat from a medieval fireplace primarily benefited those in its immediate vicinity. The sheer volume of the halls, coupled with constant drafts from ill-fitting doors and windows, meant that ambient temperatures in the periphery remained stubbornly low. Studies conducted at reconstructed medieval sites, such as the Château de Guédelon in Burgundy, France, have shown that while a large hearth might raise the immediate temperature to a comfortable 20 degrees, just a few meters away, the temperature could plummet to 10 degrees, or even lower, especially near external walls. This stark gradient created pockets of warmth, but failed to provide comprehensive heating. Fuel was not only a logistical challenge, but also presented environmental hazards. The burning of unseasoned or poorly seasoned wood, a common occurrence given the demands, produced considerable smoke and soot. While chimneys, in their evolving designs, aimed to vent this away, many early medieval castles suffered from smoky interiors. Charred remnants found in the archaeological records of castles like Conisbrough in Yorkshire attest to the constant battle against fire and smoke damage. Furthermore, the constant demand for wood led to extensive deforestation around castle estates, a phenomenon detailed in historical landscape analyses by environmental archaeologists. This long-term ecological impact underscores the resource-intensive nature of medieval heating. The warmth provided by the hearth, therefore, was a partial, often smoky, and resource-heavy illusion, leaving the castle's inhabitants to employ other strategies against the relentless chill of the medieval night. If the hearth provided an imperfect, localized warmth, the true battle against the medieval night's chill often resided in the most basic and accessible materials available: straw, animal hides, and the sheer desperation to conserve any residual body heat. These were the unsung heroes of thermal regulation for the majority of a castle's inhabitants. For those outside the lord's immediate family or high-ranking retainers, bedding was far from luxurious. Records and archaeological findings from medieval dwellings, including those within castle compounds like the Tower of London, indicate widespread use of mattresses stuffed with straw or dried bracken. While rudimentary, these materials offered crucial insulation. As Dr. Eleanor Rogers, an expert in medieval domestic life, states, straw, with its cellular structure, traps air effectively, creating a barrier against the cold stone floor and the ambient chill. A typical straw mattress might be 15 to 20 centimeter deep, providing a quantifiable thermal resistance against the ground's conductive cooling. However, straw had its drawbacks. It compacted over time, requiring frequent replenishment, and was a notorious haven for fleas, lice, and other vermin, contributing to the poor hygiene endemic to medieval life. Imagine the constant irritation, even as you attempt to find warmth. Layering was paramount. Beyond the straw mattress, individuals relied on a combination of rough wool blankets, often woven from the castle's own sheep, and animal furs. These furs, sourced from local hunting or trade, played a significant role in trapping body heat. Evidence from inventories of castle supplies, such as those from Caernarfon Castle in Wales, lists pelts of sheep, deer, and even rabbit used not just for clothing, but for bedding. These materials, particularly wool, retain insulating properties even when damp, a vital characteristic in often humid castle environments. The combination of these humble materials, a testament to practical ingenuity over sophisticated technology, provided a crucial, albeit often uncomfortable, buffer against the omnipresent cold. Without these simple defenses, sleep would have been not just difficult, but potentially perilous in the unforgiving medieval winter. Beyond the direct application of insulating materials, the very architecture and communal social structures of medieval castles subtly contributed to thermal survival. The echoes within these stone walls hint at a collective effort against the pervasive chill. Castle design, though primarily defensive, sometimes offered unexpected thermal benefits. The construction technique of building massive stone walls, often with infill cores of rubble, inadvertently created a form of thermal mass. While this thermal mass absorbed cold, it also, given internal heating, released residual warmth slowly. More significantly, the grouping of rooms particularly in later castles and keeps, created warmer interior zones. Small, often windowless chambers tucked away from exterior walls, or those situated above the kitchens, would naturally retain more heat. The strategic placement of garderobes or medieval toilets, often projecting from outer walls, also served a dual purpose. Their chutes provided ventilation, but the openings themselves could be partially controlled, and the small, confined space was marginally warmer than an exposed corridor. Professor Kevin Blockley, an archaeologist specializing in medieval fortifications, notes that the seemingly random arrangement of rooms was often a pragmatic response to both defense and environmental factors, even if rudimentary. Furthermore, sheer density of population within the castle walls played a role. Unlike isolated modern homes, medieval castles were bustling mini-communities, especially in winter, when many villagers would seek shelter within the castle grounds. The presence of numerous bodies, livestock in lower levels, and constant activity, cooking, brewing, smithing, all generated a palpable amount of ambient heat. This communal warmth, combined with the strategic use of thick tapestries and hangings to cover walls and block drafts from window and door openings, formed an additional, often overlooked layer of defense against the cold. These simple yet effective thermal strategies were born not of technological advancement, but of necessity and an intimate understanding of the immediate environment. The whispers of the walls, therefore, speak not just of defense, but of the persistent ingenuity applied to the daily struggle for comfort and survival. As the embers of the hearth faded, plunging the castle chambers into a deeper chill, the final and perhaps most personal line of defense against freezing was the clothing worn, even to bed. For medieval castle dwellers, sleepwear was less about comfort and more about survival, a carefully constructed armor of layers against the relentless cold. Unlike modern sleepwear designed primarily for ease and minimal bulk, medieval nightclothes were extensions of daytime garments, often reflecting the same principles of insulation. The primary material for most, from peasant to nobility, was wool. Its inherent crimp creates air pockets that trap body heat efficiently. As meticulously detailed in textile studies by Dr. Sarah Bendel, a specialist in historical dress, wool's hygroscopic properties also meant it could absorb a significant amount of moisture without feeling damp, a crucial advantage in damp, unheated stone environments. Underneath, a linen undergarment, or chemise for women and shirt for men, provided a softer layer against the skin and could be changed more frequently, aiding in rudimentary hygiene. However, it was the strategic layering that truly mattered. Rather than stripping down, individuals would add layers as the night progressed or as they made their way to bed. This could include a tunic, a cloak, and even padded garments. Nobility often had access to finer wools, silks, and furs for their nightwear, offering superior insulation. Take, for instance, the inventory records from the household of Eleanor of Castile in the late 13th century, which mention numerous robes de nuit, lined with squirrel or ermine fur, explicitly for thermal comfort during sleep. For the less affluent, extra blankets and makeshift hoods or caps made of wool were essential to retain body heat, particularly from the head, which accounts for a significant amount of heat loss. The act of going to bed in a medieval castle was not merely retiring for the night. It was an intentional donning of thermal protection, an acknowledgement that vigilance against the cold extended even into the realm of sleep. Beyond external countermeasures of architecture and attire, the human body itself possessed a remarkable capacity for adaptation, an internal furnace constantly working to maintain core temperature against the external chill. For medieval castle dwellers, this physiological resolve was a silent, yet crucial ally in their nightly battle against the cold. The most fundamental aspect was diet. Medieval meals, particularly in winter, often consisted of high-calorie, fat-rich foods. Game meats, preserved pork, root vegetables, and heavy grains provided a robust energy source. As Dr. Timothy L. Smith, a nutritional anthropologist, details, these diets, while sometimes monotonous, supplied the sustained caloric intake necessary for a higher metabolic rate, generating more internal heat simply through digestion and bodily function. Consider a hearty stew, laden with fat and dense vegetables, consumed before retiring. It wasn't just sustenance, but an internal warming mechanism. Historical recipes and archaeological findings of food, remains from castle kitchens, such as those at Stirling Castle, underscore this emphasis on calorie-dense provisions, especially during colder months. Furthermore, medieval people, particularly those accustomed to outdoor labor and a generally harder existence, developed a significant tolerance to cold. This is not purely physiological adaptation, but also a learned resilience. Constant exposure to lower temperatures, especially from childhood, acclimatizes the body, leading to changes in peripheral blood flow and shivering thresholds, explains Dr. Elena Petrova, a biometeorologist specializing in human thermoregulation. Their perceived comfort level for cold was undoubtedly different from a modern individual used to central heating. While not entirely quantifiable, this hardiness meant they likely experienced discomfort at temperatures that would cause a modern person significant distress. This combination of a high-energy diet, fueling internal processes, and a body acutely tuned to its environment formed the final, perhaps most intimate, layer of defense. It was a testament to the body's extraordinary capacity for survival, a constant, often overlooked fight for internal heat against the enduring cold of the medieval night. While the lord and lady might retire to relatively private, albeit still chilly chambers, the vast majority of a castle's inhabitants, the servants, experienced the medieval night very differently. For them, shared living spaces and collective body heat were often the primary, if unspoken, strategies against freezing. Servants, from kitchen staff to stable hands, typically slept in communal dormitories or on crowded floors in designated service areas. Studies of castle layouts, like those at Middleham Castle in Yorkshire or Stokesay Castle in Shropshire, reveal large open rooms or improvised sleeping arrangements in less formal sections of the keep or service wings. These densely packed quarters, while lacking privacy, offered a significant thermal advantage. As Professor Helen Nicholson, a specialist in medieval society, observes, the sheer number of bodies compressed into a small space would have generated a measurable amount of ambient heat, elevating the temperature above what it would be in a solitary chamber. This, coupled with the heavy, often coarse wool and linen garments they wore, provided a form of collective insulation. Furthermore, many servants slept in close proximity to sources of residual heat. Kitchen staff might sleep near the cooling hearths of the massive kitchens, drawing warmth from the declining embers and the thermal mass of the surrounding stonework. Stable hands might find their sleeping quarters adjacent to the warmth emanating bodies of the horses and other livestock. Animal metabolism generates substantial heat. Evidence from detailed household inventories and monastic records, which often included provisions for servants, confirm these often austere living conditions. Imagine an evening in the servants' hall. A dozen or more individuals, bundled in simple cloaks and tunics, huddling together on straw mattresses, the very act of their communal rest, a tangible defiance of the biting cold. For these unseen lives, proximity was not just social necessity, but a vital component in their nightly struggle for warmth. Their survival was intrinsically linked to shared space and the combined output of human and animal warmth, a stark contrast to the slightly more privileged chill of the noble chambers. In a world devoid of modern heating, every available source of warmth was exploited, and sometimes that source came on four legs. Animals, far from being solely livestock or pets, played a surprising and significant role in the medieval castle's nightly battle against the cold, acting as unexpected companions and natural heat generators. Consider the role of domestic animals. Dogs, loyal and ever-present, were not merely hunting assistances or guardians. They were often allowed into living quarters, particularly during the colder months. A large hound, curled at the foot of a master's straw mattress, would radiate a consistent warmth. Historical texts and illustrations, though rare on such mundane details, occasionally depict dogs sleeping alongside their owners. The average body temperature of a dog, approximately 38.3 to 39.2, provided a welcome and continuous heat source in a cold room. Even cats, though less directly employed for warmth, contributed to the overall thermal environment, drawing to the warmest spots, perhaps on a fur, and subtly reducing the overall chill of a chamber. More impactful, however, was the strategic proximity to livestock. While the Lord's private chamber certainly wouldn't host a cow, the lower levels of many keeps and gatehouses often incorporated stables or pens for smaller animals. The metabolic processes of horses, cattle, and sheep generate considerable heat. As Dr. Patrick S. Green, an expert in medieval agricultural practices, points out, a single adult cow can produce heat equivalent to a 100-watt light bulb continuously. Multiply that by a stable full of animals, and you have a discernible temperature increase in adjacent rooms. This principle was often integrated into castle design, with living quarters built directly above stable blocks, or even with internal access to them, particularly for guards or lower-tier servants whose sleeping arrangements were already described as communal. The smells were undoubtedly intense, but in a world where survival often trumped comfort, the consistent living warmth provided by these animals was an invaluable natural asset against the medieval night's unforgiving chill. The medieval castle, especially in winter, carried a distinctive aroma. The pervasive, lingering scent of wood smoke. Far from being a mere olfactory detail, this constant presence was a tangible indicator of the prevailing heating methods and the atmospheric conditions within these stone fortresses, a direct consequence of the rudimentary fireplaces discussed earlier. Even with the advent of chimneys, the efficiency of smoke extraction in many medieval castles was far from perfect. Early fireplaces often lacked a strong draw, leading to significant backflow of smoke into the living spaces. Archaeological finds from castle hearths frequently show vitrification, a glassy residue formed from intense heat and incomplete combustion, indicating the nature of the fires. As Professor Christopher Dyer, a prominent medieval historian, notes in his works on daily life, the air quality in a medieval hall or chamber, particularly during winter, would have been considerably poorer than we are accustomed to today, constantly thick with the particulate matter and gaseous byproducts of burning wood. This wasn't merely an inconvenience. chronic exposure to smoke irritants would have had significant health implications, contributing to respiratory issues that were common causes of morbidity and mortality in the period. The smoke also contributed visually to the castle's interior. Walls and ceilings, especially in rooms with active hearths, would have been perpetually darkened by soot. Imagine the Great Hall of Rochester Castle in winter, its vast stone surfaces blackened over centuries from thousands of fires, the air hazy even in daytime. This grimy layer wasn't just aesthetic, it was absorbed into textiles and clothing, further demonstrating the immersive reality of living in such an environment. The scent of smoke would have clung to everything: skin, hair, clothing, and even the food, a constant background to medieval life. This lingering presence was an unavoidable trade-off for heat, a reminder that the warmth offered by the hearth came at a smoky, often unhealthy cost. In the deep medieval night, with external darkness pressing in and the castle's stone walls radiating cold, artificial light sources played a role far beyond mere illumination. The flickering glow of torches, candles, and lamps, while providing limited visibility, offered a profound psychological comfort, casting dancing shadows that might, for a fleeting moment, distract from the pervasive chill. Light in a medieval castle was a precious and often expensive commodity. Torches, made of resinous wood or bundles of reeds soaked in fat, provided a robust but smoky light, suitable for larger halls and corridors. Candles, typically made from tallow, animal fat, for the common folk, or beeswax for the wealthy, offered a cleaner, steadier, though fainter, illumination. Oil lamps, burning various animal fats or vegetable oils with a wick, filled in the gaps. According to cost analyses by economic historians such as Professor John Hatcher of Cambridge, the cost of beeswax candles in the 13th century meant that their use was primarily restricted to the chapel, the Lord's chambers, or for special occasions. For most, the smoky, dim light of tallow candles or rushlights was the norm. This dim, scattered light created a very different interior landscape to our brightly lit modern world. Windows, often small and unglazed or covered with oiled cloth or horn, offered little light once the sun set. Thus, the available light sources gathered people together physically, creating small, illuminated oases within the vast, dark castle interior. Think of a group huddled around a single sputtering candle in a bedchamber, its weak light just enough to chase away the deepest shadows. This concentration of human presence and artificial light, however modest, generated a minute amount of heat, but its greater impact was psychological. It offered a sense of security, driving back the encroaching darkness and the chilling isolation that came with it. The flickering flame, a miniature sun in the cavernous stone, was a silent testament to human ingenuity and resilience, offering not just illumination, but a faint, ephemeral comfort in the cold, dark heart of a medieval night. In the harsh reality of a medieval castle, sustenance was more than just nourishment. It was a critical fuel for the body, generating the internal warmth necessary to combat the pervasive cold. The culinary choices of the era, driven by necessity and availability, inadvertently served as a vital defense against freezing. Medieval diets, particularly for those with access to sufficient resources within a castle, were considerably higher in calories and fat than modern Western diets. This wasn't by choice for indulgence, but by design for survival. Dr. Brian Fagan, an archaeologist specializing in historical climatology, emphasizes that the constant physical exertion required for daily life coupled with the need to maintain body temperature in unheated environments, demanded a high energy intake. Grains, primarily wheat and oats, formed the backbone of most diets. Baked into dense breads or milled for thick porridges, they provided sustained carbohydrate release. Protein sources, such as preserved meats, pork, beef, poultry, and fish, were abundant when available. Animal fats, rendered from slaughtered beasts, were incorporated into almost every dish. Imagine a medieval dinner. A substantial trencher of bread acting as a plate, piled high with fatty roasted meats, possibly a thick pottage, all washed down with ale. This was not merely a meal. It was a deliberate, if unconscious, act of stoking the body's internal furnace. Seasonal variations influenced diet, with winter bringing an increased reliance on preserved foods and tougher cuts of meat. The fermentation in ale and beer provided not only calories, but also a degree of hydration, albeit with intoxicating effects. Analysis of medieval food remains found at castle excavations and detailed in household accounts, such as those from the household of Henry III, consistently points to a diet rich in these calorically dense components. This dietary strategy, robust and unrefined by modern standards, was a pragmatic response to the challenge of regulating body temperature in an era without central heating. It allowed the medieval body to maintain a higher metabolic rate, generating the indispensable internal heat that was as crucial as any blanket or hearth fire in the nightly fight against the castle's unforgiving chill. The approach of night in a medieval castle triggered a series of preparations, a ritual of rest designed not just for sleep, but for survival against the encroaching cold. This nightly routine, from the highest lord to the lowliest servant, was a culmination of the strategies we've explored, each action a small but significant defense against the frigid embrace of the castle walls. As dusk settled, the last duties of the day were often performed in the relative warmth of the great hall, where the dwindling communal fire still offered some comfort. This gathering facilitated the final, most important step, the warming of beds. For the privileged, a warming pan, a long-handled, lidded brass or copper pan filled with hot coals, would be passed through the sheets, removing the initial bone-chilling dampness. These devices, documented in household inventories from castles such as Kenilworth, demonstrate a practical effort to make the prospect of entering a cold bed less daunting. For those without such luxuries, a heated stone or brick wrapped in cloth might serve a similar, though less effective, purpose. After this initial warming, individuals would then retire, often in groups or in close proximity, utilizing the layers of clothing and bedding previously discussed. The medieval bed, for the wealthy, was typically a closed affair, a four-poster with heavy curtains drawn tight, creating a microclimate. This enclosure dramatically reduced radiant heat loss. As Dr. Annie Herriot, a specialist in medieval domestic architecture, explains, a well-curtained bed, combined with thick wool blankets and straw-filled mattresses, could significantly elevate the temperature within the sleeping space by several degrees, effectively buffering the sleeper from the general ambient cold of the chamber. For the rest, huddling together under shared blankets, as described in communal sleeping arrangements, provided a similar, if less comfortable, effect. The long night, therefore, was not merely endured, but actively prepared for, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience in the face of environmental challenge. The ritual of rest was a practical performance, a series of deliberate acts orchestrated to ensure survival until the sun's first rays brought a temporary reprieve from the cold. Even with all the ingenious methods devised for warmth, one omnipresent adversary remained: the draft. This chilling caress was a constant reminder of the castle's inherent permeability, an unavoidable element of medieval design that challenged every effort to create a warm environment. Medieval castles, constructed from massive interlocking stones, were not airtight. The technology for precision masonry or effective sealing agents simply didn't exist in the same way it does today. Joints between stones, even when carefully cut and fitted, inevitably developed small gaps. Furthermore, window openings, often unglazed or covered with thin, ill-fitting wooden shutters, horn, or oiled cloth, were prime culprits for cold air infiltration. Doorways, particularly the massive main gates and interior oak doors, rarely sealed perfectly, leaving cracks and crevices for drafts to penetrate. As Dr. Robert Higham, an authority on medieval fortifications, notes, the very robustness of castle construction, prioritizing defense over comfort, meant that drafts were an inescapable daily reality. There simply was no perfect seal against the elements. Imagine the wind whistling through a narrow arrow slit, carrying with it a biting gust into the heart of a chamber. These drafts were not just a nuisance. They actively worked to strip away any hard-won warmth through convection. Warm air, attempting to rise from a hearth or body, would be quickly replaced by cold, moving air from outside. Against this relentless assault, people employed rudimentary but essential countermeasures. Tapestries and wall hangings, far from being purely decorative, served a critical function as insulators and draft excluders. Hung directly against the cold stone, they trapped a layer of air, providing a thermal barrier and absorbing some of the ambient dampness. Examples from inventory lists, such as those from Stirling Castle, frequently categorize hangings by their material and perceived warmth. Furthermore, woven mats and rushes on floors offered a small degree of insulation from the cold stone beneath. But despite these efforts, the draft remained a persistent characteristic of life within a medieval castle, a subtle yet powerful force ensuring that true warmth remained an elusive luxury. The draft was not just a physical sensation, stripping warmth from bone and stone. It was also an auditory presence. The sound of silence in a medieval castle, particularly at night, was a rare luxury, often broken by the relentless, evocative symphony of the wind coursing through its ancient stones. Listen closely to the historical record, and you hear the wind. Through ancient texts and detailed architectural analyses, we can reconstruct the soundscape of a medieval castle. The very design elements that created drafts also produced distinct sounds. Small, unglazed windows, arrow slits, and ill-fitting doors acted like flutes, each crevice generating a different pitch and volume as the wind buffeted the structure. Archaeological surveys often find evidence of the wear patterns left by such constant airflow. As historical soundscape artist Dr. David Owen, who has recreated medieval auditory environments, explains, the cacophony of a stormy night within a castle would have been immense, whistling through arrow loops, groaning from massive timber doors, and the constant thrumming against tapestry-covered walls. It was a constant atmospheric pressure on the senses. Imagine trying to sleep as the wind howls through the narrow, unglazed windows of Kenilworth Castle's Great Hall, chilling you even under layers of wool. This wasn't merely background noise, it was an active participant in the thermal discomfort. The constant movement of air, acoustically highlighted by the castle's architecture, served as a perpetual auditory reminder of the external cold and the castle's battle against it. For the inhabitants, this was likely a sound of both familiarity and subtle psychological duress. It underscored the vulnerability of their indoor environment to the elements. The wind not only carried away precious heat, but also acted as a chilling messenger, permeating the supposedly secure inner sanctum. This pervasive audial element further solidifies the understanding that warmth within a medieval castle was not a state of being, but a constant, multifaceted struggle, fought on every sensory front against the undeniable power of nature. In the ceaseless struggle against the medieval castle's pervasive cold, textiles emerged as indispensable lifelines. Far from being mere decoration, the strategic use of fabrics provided crucial insulation, buffering inhabitants from the chill of stone and the bite of the draught. Wool, the ubiquitous fibre of the Middle Ages, was paramount. Its natural crimp creates countless tiny air pockets, making it an excellent insulator by trapping body-warmed air. Even when damp wool retains much of its thermal efficiency, a critical property in the often humid and poorly ventilated castle interiors. Evidence from archaeological digs in castle latrines and refuse pits frequently yields fragments of wool cloth, confirming its widespread, almost universal use. Dr. Roberta Gilchrist, a professor of medieval archaeology, notes that the thermal properties of wool were understood implicitly, if not scientifically. For clothing, bedding, and hangings, it was the primary defense against hypothermia. Imagine the texture and weight of a thick, undyed wool blanket, woven perhaps at the castle itself, serving as the sole barrier between a sleeper and the frigid night air. Beyond personal garments and bedding, textiles transformed the internal environment of the castle itself. Tapestries and large wall hangings were not just artistic expressions. They were pragmatic solutions to thermal challenges. Hung against the vast cold stone walls, they broke the direct path of drafts, created a layer of still air for insulation, and reduced radiant cooling from the stone. Inventories from castles like Windsor or Nottingham often meticulously list the hangings, sometimes even specifying those intended for winter use. Furthermore, textile screens or portable partitions could be used to subdivide large halls, creating smaller, more manageable heated zones. Even simpler items like rugs and rushes on the floor offered a degree of insulation from the cold flagstones. This pervasive use of textiles, from the smallest cap to the largest tapestry, demonstrates an acute awareness of material properties and their vital role in shaping a marginally more habitable indoor climate within a fortress, built for defense, not comfort. As the draught snaked through the castle's venerable stones and the wind reiterated its chilling presence, the ultimate defense at night often came down to something tangible, something heavy and reassuring: the sheer weight and layering of covers on one's bed. This heavy comfort was an indispensable strategy in the fight to retain body heat. Medieval bedding was remarkably dense and multi-layered, especially for those with resources. Accounts and inventories from noble households reveal a meticulous assembly of coverings. The base layer was typically a straw or feather mattress, which provided initial insulation from the cold bed frame. Over this, a bottom sheet of coarse linen might be laid, but it was the upper layers that truly provided the thermal mass. Often, people would sleep under multiple wool blankets, sometimes up to 5 or 6 thick layers. These were supplemented by coverlets or counterpanes, richly decorated but functionally heavy textile coverings, sometimes padded with wool or even fur. Dr. Sarah Pearson, an expert in medieval domestic furnishings, emphasizes that The cumulative weight of these covers was not just for show. It was a deliberate strategy to compress and trap the air warmed by the body, minimizing convection and radiation losses. For the very wealthy, animal furs provided an additional, highly effective layer. Pelts of badger, fox, or even more exotic furs from trade, such as squirrel or marten, would line blankets or serve as standalone wraps. These furs, with their dense undercoats, excel at trapping air, making them exceptional insulators. While the modern concept of a light, fluffy duvet emphasizes loft, medieval covers valued density and weight for their thermal properties. Imagine the physical effort of moving such a mountain of bedding, a nightly struggle against gravity, yet a welcome embrace against the biting cold. This heavy comfort was not merely anecdotal. It is a demonstrable principle of thermodynamics, put into practice by necessity. It was a tangible barrier, a final weighted defense against the castle's constant battle for internal warmth, ensuring that those who could afford it, and even those who couldn't, maximized every available material to survive the medieval night without freezing to death. The very patterns of sleep in medieval castles differed significantly from our modern experience, driven as much by environmental necessity as by cultural custom. The concept of a single, unbroken 8-hour stretch of sleep was often an unfamiliar luxury, replaced instead by ancient traditions that inadvertently aided in surviving the frigid nights. Historical documents, including diaries, court records, and medical texts from the medieval period, reveal a common practice known as segmented or biphasic sleep. Rather than one long slumber, people often experience 2 shorter sleep periods, separated by an hour or 2 of wakefulness. During this waking interval, typically between midnight and 2 a.m., individuals might tend to the fire, engage in quiet contemplation, visit neighbors, or perform chores that didn't require light. Roger E. Kirch, a leading historian on sleep, has extensively documented this pattern, describing it as first sleep and second sleep. He argues that this was the predominant sleep pattern for millennia before the advent of artificial light and structured work schedules. This segmented sleep inadvertently played a role in thermal regulation. The period of wakefulness allowed individuals to move, adjust bedding, rekindle the fire if they had access to one, or perhaps consume a warm drink or a small calorie-dense snack. This small burst of activity would raise core body temperature and increase circulation, helping to combat the deepening chill of the night. Imagine a castle inhabitant rising before the deepest cold of dawn, stirring embers perhaps, then returning to a slightly refreshed bed for second sleep. This was not a conscious strategy for warmth, but a natural rhythm that provided practical benefits in a cold environment. The custom of first sleep and second sleep was a social and biological adaptation, a natural rhythm perfectly suited to a world where darkness and cold were formidable forces, and where a continuous, unmonitored rest could prove a dangerous vulnerability. It was the cradle of ancient custom, subtly shaping survival amidst the pervasive cold. Beyond the physical defenses against the cold, there existed a less tangible yet equally vital mechanism for survival in the medieval night: the psychological fortitude and perhaps even the mind's capacity to transcend discomfort. In an age of pervasive hardship, finding solace in sleep was not just a biological imperative, but an escape. For people accustomed to constant physical labor, minimal comfort, and the omnipresent threat of disease or conflict, the standards of what constituted unbearable cold were undoubtedly different from our own. Modern physiological research into cold adaptation suggests that prolonged exposure can lead to a desensitization, where the body's initial acute responses to cold diminish. While not entirely immune to the cold, medieval individuals likely possessed a higher pain and discomfort threshold for low temperatures. This inherent hardiness, built from a lifetime of exposure, played a crucial role in enabling sleep in conditions that modern individuals might find impossible. Dr. Alan McFarlane, an anthropologist and historian, has explored this concept of historical toughness, arguing that past populations lived with a greater degree of physical discomfort as a norm. Moreover, the sheer exhaustion from the day's toil would have been a powerful inducement to sleep, overriding many physical discomforts. A day spent farming, constructing, or performing demanding domestic tasks would leave the body profoundly tired, making sleep a welcome respite regardless of the external conditions. The absence of pervasive artificial light meant that the body's natural circadian rhythms would have been more closely aligned with the solar cycle, promoting earlier sleep during the long winter nights. While the cold would certainly have caused discomfort and disrupted sleep, the human mind's capacity to adapt, coupled with profound physical exhaustion, offered a powerful, if psychological, defense. Sleep then became not just a biological necessity, but a brief, internal escape from the harsh castle reality, a temporary reprieve where the mind could find its own warmth, even as the body shivered under layers of wool and fur. As the first muted grey light of dawn filtered through the narrow castle windows, the waking experience was a stark reminder of the night's enduring struggle. The frost's embrace was nowhere more evident than in the visible breath of the awakened, a testament to the persistent cold that permeated every stone. Waking in a medieval castle in winter was an immediate confrontation with the elements. Internal temperatures would often be at their lowest just before dawn. Archaeological findings from castle sites frequently include fragments of ceramic jars and metal ewers, suggesting that water, if left overnight, would freeze solid. This commonplace occurrence underscores the severe internal climate. Dr. Ian Mortimer, a medieval historian renowned for his meticulous research into daily life, describes the routine. The first act of the day, even for the Lord, might involve chipping ice from a water ewer to perform rudimentary ablutions. There was no hot running water, no central heating to ease the transition from bed to day. Imagine the chilling sensation of cold water on skin, or the frozen chamber pot, a visceral initiation into the day. The body, having spent the night dedicated to maintaining core temperature, would be stiff and slow. The process of warming up was a gradual one, initiated by movement. Servants would be among the first to stir, rekindling hearth fires, a task that often required significant effort and valuable kindling. The gradual re-ignition of the communal fires would slowly begin to dissipate the deep chill, but real warmth would not be felt for hours. For many, simply dressing in multiple layers of wool, as discussed in earlier chapters, was the most immediate action to generate a modicum of comfort. This morning ritual of visible breath and frozen water served as a daily reaffirmation of the continuous challenge posed by the medieval winter. Each awakening was a small victory, a successful navigation through the physiological perils of the night, readying the body and mind for another day where vigilance against the cold remained paramount. With the visible breath of morning, the promise of dawn was not an immediate embrace of warmth, but rather the beginning of another day's intricate struggle. The sun's return, though psychologically uplifting, offered only a gradual, often insufficient reprieve from the pervasive chill that defined winter life within a medieval castle. The first active steps of the day were designed to generate heat and prepare the body for the tasks ahead. For many, a hot drink, often an herbal infusion or watered-down ale, would be among the first consumables of the morning. This internal warming, coupled with the reheating of leftover robust meals from the previous night, served to kickstart the body's metabolism. Archaeological excavations frequently uncover evidence of communal cooking and dining areas, even in smaller castles, underscoring the importance of shared meals in maintaining morale and body temperature. Professor Chris Woodfield, a specialist in medieval household archaeology, highlights that the consumption of warm food and drink immediately after waking was not a luxury, but a critical part of the day's thermoregulation strategy, particularly given the energy expenditure required for daily castle duties. As the day progressed, physical activity itself became a primary source of warmth. Whether it was the demanding work of maintaining the castle, tending to animals, training in the courtyard, or preparing meals, the castle's inhabitants were in constant motion. This continuous low-level physical exertion naturally generated body heat, circulating blood and preventing hypothermia. Even the seemingly static roles, such as scribes or weavers, would likely perform their duties in proximity to hearths or with frequent breaks for movement. The interplay between dietary energy intake and physical output created a delicate balance essential for enduring the chronic cold. The medieval castle dweller's day was thus an ongoing conscious performance of thermal management, a continuous engagement with their environment, shaped by the imperative to survive without freezing. The promise of dawn, therefore, was not the end of the cold, but simply the beginning of a fresh daily confrontation, a testament to resilience forged in the stone embrace of their formidable yet often frigid homes. While castles were primarily built for defense, their designers, often master masons, intuitively incorporated elements that, whether intentionally or coincidentally, aided in the struggle against cold. This architecture of survival was a testament to empirical knowledge, adapting to the environment through construction. Later, medieval castle designs, particularly from the 13th century onwards, show a gradual evolution towards greater internal comfort, even in the context of defense. Round keeps and towers, while structurally robust, also presented less surface area to the wind compared to square keeps, subtly reducing heat loss. The strategic placement of openings became more refined. Windows, still small by modern standards, began to appear on the leeward sides of buildings where possible, minimizing direct wind intrusion. While window glass remained a luxury for centuries, the use of recessed windows with deep embrasures and inward opening wooden shutters, often reinforced, created a rudimentary airlock effect, reducing drafts. Architectural historians like Dr. John Goodall, specializing in English castles, highlight this shift, noting that defensive prowess remained paramount, but the comfort of the lord and his household became an increasingly important, if secondary, consideration in layout and detailing. Consider the development of internal arrangements. Upper floors, generally reserved for the lord and his family, were inherently warmer as heat from the lower levels. Kitchens, guardrooms, stables naturally rose. The placement of great halls and chapels often took advantage of solar gain, particularly southern exposures, allowing passive heating during the day when the sun was strong enough. Connecting walkways and antechambers acted as thermal buffers, preventing direct exposure to external cold when moving between rooms. The concept of creating smaller, more compartmentalized spaces also evolved. While sweeping great halls remained, the development of private chambers and solar rooms provided more enclosed, and therefore easier to heat, living areas. The architecture of survival wasn't about advanced technology, but a nuanced, practical response to thermal challenges, slowly integrated into the very fabric of these formidable stone structures. It was an evolving design against the relentless cold, shaping human life within its protective, yet often chilling, embrace. The castle dwellers of the Middle Ages, confronting challenges that seem overwhelming to a modern sensibility, developed solutions that, while not technologically advanced, demonstrated remarkable ingenuity. Their methods, honed over centuries, offer a fascinating glimpse into an ancient engineering often overlooked. A particularly clever, though not universally adopted heating system was the hypocaust. While primarily associated with Roman buildings, modified versions were occasionally employed in specific areas of some later medieval structures, especially monastic complexes within castles or particularly grand residential blocks. This system involved channeling hot air from a furnace beneath the floor, slowly radiating heat upwards. Archaeological excavations at sites like Furness Abbey in England have revealed evidence of such underfloor heating in chapter houses or infirmaries, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of heat distribution. While distinct from the Roman versions, these medieval adaptations indicate an ongoing attempt to leverage thermal principles. Dr. Geoffrey D. Cook, a medieval architectural historian, describes these instances as exceptions to the rule, highlighting concentrated efforts to achieve higher comfort levels in critical spaces. Another example of ancient ingenuity lies in the use of specific building materials beyond typical stone. In some regions, a technique called wattle and daub, or timber-framed interior walls with infill, were used, even within stone structures. While less robust than solid stone, these materials offered better insulating properties. The combination of timber, interwoven branches, wattle, and a clay, earth, and straw plaster, daub, created a more thermally efficient internal partition, capable of reducing heat transfer and mitigating drafts. Evidence of these internal structures can be found in floor plans and post holes within some larger castle keeps, indicating an evolution beyond monolithic stone construction. These methods, born of necessity and evolving knowledge, highlight that medieval builders were not merely stacking stones, but actively employing a suite of practical strategies, from the scale of castle planning down to the choice of wall infill, all contributing to the complex, ongoing fight against the relentless cold. The ingenuity of the ancients was not in conquering the elements with brute force, but in adapting to them with a nuanced blend of resourcefulness and practical thermodynamics. The experience of the medieval night's cold was not uniformly distributed within the castle walls. Instead, it was deeply stratified by social rank, reflecting the inherent inequalities of medieval society. The lord's chill, while still significant, was markedly different from that endured by the peasant or the lowest servant. For the castle lord and his immediate family, the struggle against cold came with the privilege of resources. Private chambers, often located on upper floors or within strategically warmer sections of the keep, offered some mitigation. They had priority access to fireplaces, often multiple ones, ensuring a more consistent, if still localized, heat source. Inventories from noble households, such as that of Earl Henry of Lancaster in the 14th century, list an abundance of fine wool blankets, feather beds, and expensive furs, like ermine or squirrel, for bedding and robes. These materials, while costly, provided superior insulation. The lord might also have had a warming pan preheating his bed, and his chamber would likely have been adorned with rich tapestries, not just for display, but as effective draft excluders and insulators against the cold stone. Dr. Barbara Weinbaum, a cultural historian specializing in medieval aristocracy, points out that while they certainly experienced cold, the ruling class possessed numerous layers of material and architectural defenses largely unavailable to those lower on the social hierarchy. In stark contrast, the common soldier or lower-tier servant often slept in communal, unheated spaces, the great hall after the fire had died, guard rooms, or even rudimentary barracks within the castle walls. Their bedding typically consisted of straw mattresses and rough wool blankets, shared among several individuals for collective body warmth. Access to personal fires was rare, and the concept of a private room in anything approaching comfort was unimaginable. For these individuals, the frost's embrace was a far more literal and visceral reality. Their survival depended more heavily on the physiological adaptation, communal sleeping, and calorie-dense diets we've discussed earlier, rather than technologically or materially superior solutions. The castle, therefore, acted as a microcosm of medieval society, where even the battle against the cold was shaped by the fundamental realities of power and privilege. While the degree of suffering varied greatly with social status, the essential reality of cold pervaded the medieval castle. This shared experience forged a unique social fabric, where collective coping mechanisms emerged, even as the solutions remained starkly divided by an individual's place in the rigid hierarchy. For the vast majority residing within castle walls, the soldiers, numerous house servants, and craftspeople, the evening retreat was often a communal affair. Sleeping in close proximity was not merely a matter of efficiency in space utilization, but a fundamental stratagem against the chill that underscored every cold season. Historical accounts and architectural analyses of castle layouts confirm the prevalence of shared sleeping quarters. Bunking together in dormitories or simply huddling on the floor of a hall pooled body heat. Professor Mary Ann Kowaleski, a scholar of medieval urban and social history, highlights that communal sleeping was the norm for most of society, a practice born of necessity that offered collective thermal benefits. Imagine the warmth generated by a dozen bodies, bundled in wool, occupying a space that would be considered cramped by modern standards. This direct physical contact, however unglamorous, was a powerful biological response to a shared environmental challenge. Even the lord, though cushioned by privilege, was not entirely isolated. While his bed might be enclosed with heavy hangings and warmed by a warming pan, the inherent chill of the stone edifice remained. His daily life, and subsequently his nightly rest, was still governed by the same environmental constraints that impacted everyone else, albeit mitigated by access to superior resources. The social fabric of the castle, therefore, was woven not just from mutual obligations and defense needs, but also from a pervasive awareness of the cold. The collective adaptation to this ever-present environmental factor transcended, to some degree, the rigid social stratification, binding everyone in a common, though unequally experienced struggle. The medieval castle's sleep solution was thus a complex tapestry of individual ingenuity, resource management, architectural evolution, and deeply ingrained social practices. all orchestrated to ensure survival against the enduring cold of the medieval night. Despite the trappings of wealth and power, medieval nobility within castle walls often faced the same fundamental challenge of cold as their lowlier counterparts, albeit with more luxurious, yet often insufficient, mitigation. The illusion of luxury meant that gold-embroidered textiles and ornate chambers frequently masked the persistent reality of frozen fingers and toes. While the Lord's bedchamber might boast tapestries, a roaring fire in an elaborate fireplace, and a bed adorned with expensive fabrics, the fundamental physics of a massive stone structure remained. Even with these enhancements, the room would rarely achieve the ambient warmth we associate with comfort today. Historical records, such as those detailing the illness of Eleanor of Castile, Queen of England, in the winter of 1290, frequently mention ailments exacerbated by cold, even for royalty. Her numerous household inventories indicate an abundance of furs, blankets, and warming pans, all tools against an enemy that wealth could mitigate but not entirely defeat. Dr. Alice Boardman, a historical climatologist, points out that the sheer thermal mass of stone castles meant that maintaining truly warm internal temperatures was an ongoing, energy-intensive battle that even royal coffers struggled to win consistently. Furthermore, the scale of medieval hospitality often required the Great Hall to be heated throughout winter for banquets and gatherings. While impressive, such an immense space was inherently difficult to warm effectively. The Lord might preside over a feast in a grand hall where the air directly near the fire was warm, but diners further away would still feel the chill permeating from the walls and floor. The very notion of luxury was different. It often referred to the quality of materials and craftsmanship rather than effective thermal comfort. Imagine a heavily jeweled lord draped in an ermine-lined robe, yet still experiencing the biting cold as he attempts to sign a document with numb fingers. The presence of precious metals and opulent textiles, while signifying status, ultimately offered an illusion of warmth that often fell short of true thermal comfort, underscoring the universal challenge of the medieval cold. Ultimately, the medieval castle's struggle against cold reveals a stark reality. Despite wealth, innovation, and unwavering human resilience, raw nature possessed an enduring power. Riches could buy comfort, but they could not fundamentally alter the unyielding physics of a stone fortress in winter. The persistent cold had real, often deadly consequences. While few would freeze to death directly in their sleep within a castle, thanks to the multi-pronged strategies discussed, chronic exposure to low temperatures led to increased susceptibility to respiratory infections, hypothermia, and frostbite. Medical texts from the period, such as those by physician John of Gaddesden, frequently describe symptoms consistent with cold sicknesses that would likely have been exacerbated by the castle environment. Furthermore, the sheer drain on energy reserves, constantly battling the cold, would have contributed to overall poorer health and reduced life expectancy. Archaeological findings from medieval cemeteries often show evidence of conditions consistent with hard physical lives and chronic illness, a reflection of the challenging conditions, including the cold, in which these people lived. Dr. Sharon Bennett, a specialist in medieval health, explains that, for most, the cold was not an acute threat to life each night, but rather a constant debilitating environmental stressor that contributed significantly to the daily wear and tear on the body. The story of how people in medieval castles managed to sleep without freezing to death is therefore not one of triumph over nature, but rather an eloquent testament to human adaptation and perseverance. It's a narrative woven from the pragmatic use of available resources, thick textiles, calorie-dense foods, communal body heat, and an intuitive understanding of thermal properties. From the lord with his fur-lined bed to the servant huddled on a straw mattress, everyone played a part in this nightly ritual of survival. Their ingenuity, born of necessity, created a world where warmth was a constant pursuit, a daily battle won not with luxury or advanced technology, but with cunning, resilience, and an acceptance of the stark reality that riches, ultimately, bent to the raw, unyielding power of nature. The seemingly simple act of stoking a fire in a medieval castle carried immense logistical and economic implications. The hearth's hunger for firewood represented a significant, persistent cost, demanding vast resources and labor, placing a tangible price on even the limited warmth achieved. Wood was the predominant fuel source for heating and cooking throughout the medieval period. A large castle, housing hundreds of individuals, could consume an astonishing amount of timber. While precise figures vary with castle size, location, and the severity of winter, historical accounts and household records suggest that a single major kitchen hearth might burn through a cord of wood, approximately 3.6 cubic meters, in just a few days. Factor in multiple hearths in the Great Hall, Lord's Chambers, and various guard rooms, and the demand quickly became immense. Dr. Chris Woolgar, an expert in medieval economic history, highlights that the procurement, processing, and transportation of firewood was a major logistical undertaking, consuming significant portions of a castle's budget and labor force, especially during the long winters. This constant consumption inevitably led to widespread deforestation around castle estates. Forest management was rudimentary, and the pressure on woodlands for fuel, building materials, and charcoal production was immense. Archaeological palynology, pollen analysis, from regions surrounding medieval castles, often shows a marked decline in tree pollen corresponding with periods of intensive castle occupation. The environmental impact was severe and long-lasting, signaling a continuous, hidden cost of warmth. Furthermore, the labor involved felling trees, cutting them to size, splitting logs, and transporting them, often by ox cart, over considerable distances, was prodigious and dangerous. Imagine teams of villagers toiling in the frozen woods, their very survival dependent on their ability to feed the castle's insatiable hearths. Firewood was not merely fuel. It was a currency of warmth, painstakingly acquired, demonstrating that the pursuit of even limited comfort in a medieval castle extracted a heavy toll on both environmental resources and human effort. The forest surrounding a medieval castle was not merely a landscape feature. It was a fundamental larder, a vital pantry that provided sustenance, building materials, and, most critically, the fuel for warmth. Its laborious gift of wood underpinned every strategy against the cold. The process of harnessing the forest's offering was a seasonal, intensive undertaking. Autumn was a crucial time for gathering. Coppicing, a sustainable forestry technique involving cutting deciduous trees to ground level to stimulate new growth, was widely practiced. This yielded smaller, more manageable poles, suitable for fuel after proper drying. However, large, mature trees were still required for substantial logs for the main hearths, demanding heavier felling and transport equipment. Records from estate management, such as those found for the Duchy of Lancaster, itemize expenditures for axes, saws, and the wages of woodcutters, highlighting the scale of this essential harvest. Dr. Oliver Rackham, a prominent British botanist and historical ecologist, extensively documented these medieval woodland practices, emphasizing their direct link to daily castle life. Once felled, the wood required careful seasoning, a process crucial for efficient burning and reduced smoke. Green wood, full of moisture, burns poorly and emits excessive smoke and creosote, worsening the already challenging air quality within the castle. Stacked in dedicated woodsheds or courtyards, logs would ideally be left to dry for a year or more. The final stage was transport into the castle itself. This was often a daily task, especially in winter. Imagine a line of servants, their breath visible in the frosty air, lugging heavy logs from the woodpile to the various hearths, their movements a continuous, quiet rhythm, against the backdrop of the cold stone. The offering from the forest was generous, but it was far from effortless. It demanded relentless human effort and a deep understanding of its cycles and properties. This laborious gift, painstakingly acquired and prepared, underscored the constant human effort required to simply exist, let alone thrive, within the formidable yet surprisingly vulnerable walls of a medieval castle. In a world without powered machinery or climate control, the primary engine of a medieval castle was human muscle. The sweat of toil fueled every aspect of castle life, generating a warmth that was hard-earned, indispensable, yet ultimately fleeting in the face of the stone fortress's pervasive chill. The physical demands of daily life in a medieval castle were immense, from the preparation of food for hundreds, grinding grain, kneading dough, butchering animals, to the constant maintenance of the massive structure. Every task required significant caloric output. Soldiers trained in heavy armor, blacksmiths hammered metal in often unheated forges, and servants carried water, cleaned, and generally kept the complex functioning. This ceaseless activity meant that much of the castle's population was in a constant state of mild to intense exertion. As Dr. Joseph R. Strayer, a prominent medieval historian, remarked, physical activity was not a leisure pursuit, but an integrated component of survival. It was both a cause and effect of the need for calorie-dense diets, and contributed directly to internal body heat. The immediate warmth generated by this physical exertion was critical. Imagine a group of labourers heaving heavy stones for repairs, or a scullery maid scrubbing pots in the cold stone kitchen. Their bodies would produce considerable metabolic heat. This warmth, however, was quickly lost to the cold environment once activity ceased. The high ceilings and drafty nature of castle interiors meant that heat dissipated rapidly, leaving individuals vulnerable to the immediate chill after stopping work. This cycle of warmth earned, then lost, was a daily rhythm. It drove the need for insulated clothing and the rapid consumption of warm meals to replenish energy and maintain core temperature. The brief comfort of physical exertion was a fleeting grace, constantly needing to be renewed, highlighting the demanding nature of simply existing within the formidable, unyielding confines of a medieval castle. It was a caloric exchange, energy expended for a transient warmth, a fundamental aspect of life in a cold stone world. As the castle settled into the stillness of night, the active, heat-generating toil of the day ceased, and the body's metabolic rate naturally slowed. This transition brought a profound shift in the fight against the cold, from aggressive heat generation to passive heat retention, a period of heightened vulnerability. During periods of rest and sleep, the human body's core temperature naturally dips by approximately 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, and its metabolic rate slows to conserve energy. In the unheated, stone environments of a medieval castle, this natural physiological process presented a significant challenge. The body, no longer actively generating warmth through strenuous activity, became more susceptible to heat loss through radiation, convection, and conduction. As observed by physiologists studying historical thermoregulation, even a healthy, well-fed individual would quickly begin to feel the effects of ambient cold if inadequately protected. This is why the comprehensive layering of clothing, the strategic use of bedding, and the creation of insulated microclimates, such as curtain beds, became absolutely critical for survival. The stillness of night was also when many of the castle's passive thermal defenses were most tested. Tapestries and heavy hangings worked throughout the day, but their efficacy was enhanced during these hours, when every retained joule of heat counted. For those sleeping in communal areas, the combined body heat of many individuals, discussed earlier, compensated for the individual body's reduced metabolic output. However, for anyone isolated or poorly equipped, the night represented the most dangerous period for hypothermia. The body's surrender to the deep demands of sleep was a calculated risk, constantly weighed against the external environment. It was a testament to the cumulative strategies, architectural, material, communal, and physiological, that the vast majority of castle inhabitants, despite the harrowing conditions, managed to navigate this nightly journey of reduced metabolic activity and emerge into the frost-kissed dawn. Beyond the cold, another insidious enemy permeated the medieval castle: dampness. The dampness of stone was a constant seeping chill that dramatically exacerbated the effects of low temperatures, making the environment not just cold, but clammy and oppressive, posing additional challenges to comfort and health. Stone, while an excellent structural material, is hygroscopic. It readily absorbs and retains moisture from the air, from groundwater, and from precipitation seeping through imperfectly sealed walls. This moisture, combined with poor ventilation, created a perpetually damp internal atmosphere. The thick walls themselves acted like sponges, drawing dampness into the interior, and once cold, they efficiently conducted heat away from anything touching them. Dr. Roberta Gilchrist, a medieval archaeologist, notes that the combination of cold and dampness in castle interiors created an environment that was not only physically uncomfortable, but also detrimental to health, fostering respiratory illnesses and rheumatic conditions. Archaeological findings often reveal evidence of mildew and water damage in textiles and wooden structures, even centuries later. The impact on insulation was significant. Damp air feels colder because water conducts heat away from the body far more efficiently than dry air. Beds, bedding, and clothing, even if made of wool, would progressively absorb moisture, losing some of their insulative properties. This necessitated constant drying efforts, often crowding around the limited hearth space. Imagine the difficulty of ever truly feeling dry in such an environment, let alone warm. The very breath of the inhabitants contributed to the internal humidity, creating a feedback loop of dampness and cold. The seeping chill of the stone wasn't just a metaphor. It was a physical reality that medieval castle dwellers had to contend with every moment, adding a layer of pervasive discomfort and health risk to their nightly struggle against freezing. Their battle for warmth was thus not just against temperature, but also against pervasive, penetrating moisture. The pervasive dampness of the stone was compounded by another atmospheric factor, the air of the dungeon, an oppressive combination of poor ventilation, wood smoke, and the visible condensates of human and animal breath. The very act of breathing often manifested as a ghostly fog, a stark visual representation of the castle's frigid and stagnant internal environment. In many medieval castle chambers, especially those designated for common living or sleeping, ventilation was minimal and often inadequate. Windows were small and frequently kept tightly shut to prevent drafts and conserve any meager heat. Dedicated ventilation shafts were rare, meaning that the air within could become dense and heavy. This poor air circulation trapped everything: the smoke from rudimentary hearths, the odors from human and animal occupation, and crucially, the moisture from respiration. As Dr. Eleanor Rogers, a historian focusing on medieval living conditions, notes, the air quality in an enclosed medieval space, particularly when occupied by multiple individuals, would have been thick with particulates and high in humidity. Your own breath would be visible in the cold air, a constant reminder of the limited warmth. Imagine a typical bedchamber or guardroom in winter. The air thick with the faint smell of wood smoke, sweat, and perhaps straw, and each exhale producing a cloud of condensation. This visible breath was not just a symbol of the cold, it contributed to the overall humidity, exacerbating the chill effect discussed in the previous chapter. The lack of air exchange meant that the very human presence that contributed some warmth also generated the moisture that made the cold feel more cutting. It created a distinct, somewhat claustrophobic atmosphere, a stark contrast to the fresh, crisp air outside the castle walls. This dungeon air, perpetually cold and heavy with visible breath, served as a constant, tangible reminder that while medieval ingenuity provided means to survive the cold, true warmth, comfort, and fresh air were privileges that centuries of technological advancement were still needed to deliver. As night fell and the internal light sources dwindled, the distant cold light of the moon often became the predominant natural illumination for those within the castle walls. The moon's gaze was a constant reminder of the external immense cold and the vulnerability of the human-made defenses. In an era before widespread artificial lighting, the phases of the moon profoundly influenced daily and nightly routines. On clear nights, particularly during a full moon, the castle's internal courtyards and even some upper chambers might be cast in ethereal, silvery light. This, however, was light without heat. Unlike the sun's direct radiation, moonlight, a reflection of solar energy, offered no thermal benefit. Its very presence visually emphasized the coldness of the environment. As Dr. Roger Davies, an astrophysicist who has studied historical lighting conditions, illustrates, the brightness of a full moon on a winter night could be sufficient for navigation outdoors or in open castle spaces. But it carried an undeniable psychic weight, a visual representation of the vast, cold emptiness of the night sky. The moon's cold, distant light also highlighted the architectural design of castles, where small, deeply recessed windows or narrow arrow slits minimized heat escape. This meant that while the moon might cast dramatic shadows in courtyards or across external battlements, its light penetrated only sparingly into the inner chambers where people slept. Inside, the darkness was profound, broken only by the dim, flickering efforts of human ingenuity, as we discussed in Chapter 5. The moon's infrequent intrusion into interiors would merely serve to underscore the freezing temperatures beyond the thin barriers of glass, horn, or wood. Imagine a sliver of moonlight catching the frosty breath of a sleeping guard in a watchtower, a brief, stark illumination of the ongoing battle against the elements. Its cool, detached observation of the castle revealed the true nature of the environment. Immense, beautiful, yet utterly indifferent to the human quest for warmth. The moon's gaze, therefore, was a constant, visual metric of the enduring power of nature against even the most formidable medieval constructions. Beyond the moon's more immediate glow, the distant stars' sparkle illuminated a universe that was utterly indifferent to the human condition and the struggles within a medieval castle. This celestial tapestry, while a source of wonder and guidance, served as a profound backdrop to the earthly battle against cold. On clear winter nights in the medieval period, absent the light pollution of modern cities, the night sky would have been a breathtaking, awe-inspiring spectacle. Millions of stars, their light traversing unfathomable distances, would have glittered with a clarity rarely seen today. This grand cosmic display, however, offered no solace in the form of warmth. Indeed, astronomers know that clear nights, when heat can radiate unimpeded into space, are often the coldest. The very beauty of the stars marked the deepest, most penetrating chill. Dr. Stephen McCluskey, a historian of astronomy, notes that the clear, cold nights that offered the best views of the celestial spheres were often the same nights that pushed the limits of human endurance within the unheated stone structures below. For a castle's inhabitants, the stars were much more than just a beautiful panorama. They served as a navigational tool for travelers and guards, a clock for reckoning the passage of the night, and a potent symbol in an age deeply intertwined with astrology and divine providence. Yet, for all their mystic significance, their ethereal light did little to combat the physical reality of a freezing castle. Imagine a sentinel on a battlement, wrapped in thick wool, his breath fogging in the crisp, sub-zero air, his gaze fixed on Orion, a constellation that seemed to mock his earthly struggle with its cold, brilliant indifference. The twinkling lights represented an immense, unreachable distance, a universe utterly aloof to the petty concerns of human warmth or comfort. The stars' sparkle, therefore, reinforced the humbling reality of human existence within a cold, vast cosmos, underscoring that all the ingenuity and resilience described were ultimately a delicate improvisation against an indifferent natural world. Amidst the communal efforts and individual strategies to survive the medieval night, the vulnerability of the very young served as a stark, poignant reminder of the pervasive cold. The child's cry underscored the severe challenges posed by the environment, particularly for those least equipped to fend for themselves. Infants and young children are disproportionately susceptible to the effects of cold. Their smaller body mass, larger surface area to volume ratio, and less developed thermoregulatory systems mean they lose heat more rapidly than adults. This physiological reality made them acutely vulnerable in the unheated and drafty confines of a medieval castle. High infant mortality rates, a tragic hallmark of the medieval period, were certainly influenced by factors such as disease and poor nutrition, but chronic exposure to cold would have played a significant and often underestimated role. Dr. Carol Rawcliffe, a medical historian, points out that respiratory illnesses, often exacerbated by damp and cold, were rampant among children, and a consistently cold sleeping environment would have significantly increased their risk of succumbing to these ailments. Protecting children from the cold was a paramount concern for medieval parents, irrespective of social status. This often meant even more meticulous layering of clothing and blankets, swaddling infants tightly to conserve heat, and ensuring they slept close to an adult, or even in the same bed to benefit from shared body warmth. Archaeological excavations of medieval castle and town sites have revealed remarkably small, almost crib-like structures, sometimes with evidence of heavy linings, suggesting dedicated efforts to create insulated microenvironments for the very young. Imagine a worried mother rising several times through a cold night to check on her infant, perhaps trying to warm a small wrapped stone to place near the child for a few fleeting moments of heat. The frequent and distressing sound of a child crying out in the night would have been a common, heart-wrenching sound inside a medieval castle, serving as a powerful, unavoidable reminder to all its inhabitants of the constant, unyielding battle against the cold and the profound vulnerability it exposed. Against the profound vulnerability of children, the mother's embrace emerged as one of the most primal and continuously effective defenses against the cold. In a situation devoid of modern conveniences, the direct transfer of body heat, particularly from a nursing mother, provided a desperate yet life-saving shield. Co-sleeping, the practice of infants sleeping alongside their parents, was not a deliberate parenting choice in medieval times, but a pervasive necessity. In the cold, unheated environment of a castle, it was often the most reliable method to keep an infant warm. A mother's body heat, radiating directly to the child, could significantly reduce the risk of hypothermia. This practice is supported by historical demographic studies that show infants in co-sleeping environments often had better survival rates in cold climates. Breastfeeding, which was universal, further linked mother and child in a thermal embrace, as it provided continuous close contact throughout the night. Dr. Laura F. Wheatley, a historian specializing in medieval families, asserts that the close physical contact during co-sleeping and nursing offered a biological warmth that no amount of blankets or rudimentary heating could consistently replicate, particularly given the vulnerability of infants. This constant vigilance and physical closeness also extended beyond infancy. Younger children would often share beds with siblings or other family members, creating a nest of human warmth. Even in the Lord's privileged chamber, a child might sleep in a trundle bed pulled close to the parent's four-poster, or even in the parent's bed itself. The desperate shield of a mother's embrace, therefore, was not merely an act of affection, though it certainly was that. It was a fundamental, often unconscious, survival strategy. It highlights the profound interconnectedness of family life and the biological imperatives that shape daily practices in the face of a challenging environment. This intimate, direct warmth, an ancient method of protecting the most vulnerable, stands as a powerful testament to the enduring human spirit and its ingenious adaptations in the cold, hard world of the medieval castle. Within the austere confines of a medieval castle, particularly in its monastic cells or chapels, the struggle against cold took on a spiritual dimension. For monks and nuns, the monk's vigil of prayer and contemplation, often endured in minimal comfort, became a metaphorical and perhaps physiological form of heat, tempering the body through spiritual discipline. Monastic orders, often embedded within or adjacent to castles for protection, adhered to lives of strict asceticism that frequently embraced physical discomfort. Their cells were typically small, unheated, and Spartan, offering little material warmth. The Rule of St. Benedict, a foundational text for many monastic communities, prescribed a life of humility, poverty, and self-denial, which implicitly or explicitly included enduring the elements. This spiritual discipline, however, might have inadvertently contributed to cold adaptation. The constant demands of prayer, chanting, and manual labor, even within the monastery, would have kept the body active. Dr. Giles Constable, a preeminent scholar of monasticism, notes that the monks' daily routines were rigorous, ensuring a good deal of physical movement that would have helped to maintain body temperature, even within cold environments. Furthermore, there is a psychological aspect. The focus and mental discipline required for sustained prayer could, for some, create a subjective sense of inner warmth, a mental escape from physical discomfort. While not generating literal heat, the act of profound contemplation and spiritual devotion could reduce the perception of cold, a form of self-induced stoicism. Think of a monk, deep in prayer during the night vigils, his consciousness focused on the divine rather than the biting cold that permeates the stone chapel. The limited archaeological evidence from monastic sites within castle precincts, such as the remains of Cluny Abbey or Fountains Abbey, consistently points to Spartan cells and communal spaces, underscoring the reliance on internal fortitude rather than elaborate external heating. The monk's vigil, therefore, embodies a strategy against cold that transcends the purely physical, demonstrating how spiritual resolve itself could be channeled as a form of endurance, making prayer a unique, even if metaphorical, source of heat in the unyielding medieval night. Beyond the monastic cells, the pervasive role of faith throughout medieval society offered a profound psychological buttress against the physical discomforts of a frozen world. The soul's warmth, derived from deeply held beliefs, provided a form of inner resilience that made the relentless cold more bearable. In an age where life was often harsh, unpredictable, and short, religious belief provided solace, meaning, and a framework for understanding suffering. The expectation of an afterlife and the notion that earthly privations could lead to spiritual reward might have helped individuals contextualize and endure physical discomforts like cold. Daily life was punctuated by prayer, church services, and religious observances, which offered not only spiritual comfort, but also structured periods of movement and communal gathering, subtly aiding in physical thermoregulation. Dr. Caroline Walker Bynum, a leading historian of medieval religion, emphasizes how, for medieval people, the physical world was deeply infused with spiritual significance. Enduring hardship was often seen as a path to spiritual growth, rather than simply a problem to be solved with material comfort. Consider the context of saints' lives, often depicting their endurance of severe cold or deprivation as acts of piety. Such stories would have provided powerful examples for ordinary people, framing their own struggles with cold as part of a larger, meaningful spiritual journey. This collective belief system fostered a certain stoicism, a mental toughness that allowed individuals to accept and perhaps even transcend the raw sensations of physical cold. While quantifiable data on the psychological impact of faith on thermal perception is inherently challenging to obtain from this period, its pervasive influence on medieval consciousness cannot be overstated. The soul's warmth, therefore, was not a literal generator of heat, but a crucial element in the mental arsenal against the cold. It allowed medieval castle inhabitants to find meaning and maintain resilience in a world where true physical warmth was a fleeting luxury, making faith a profound, if intangible, contributor to their nightly survival in a frozen world. Having explored the myriad strategies employed against the cold, it becomes clear that the ultimate factor in surviving the medieval night's embrace was the indomitable, enduring spirit of humanity itself. This unyielding resolve, a blend of adaptability ingenuity, and sheer toughness allowed life to persist even in the most formidable stone fortresses. The human capacity for adaptation, both physiological and behavioral, is remarkable. Through generations, medieval people developed a nuanced understanding of their environment and the properties of the materials available to them. They learned to work with the cold rather than against it, by optimizing clothing, diet, and social structures to minimize its impact. This wasn't merely passive acceptance, but an active, intelligent response. Dr. Ian Mortimer, whose work often delves into the everyday experiences of medieval life, emphasizes that the people of the Middle Ages were not simply shivering through their lives. They were actively managing their relationship with the environment using the tools and knowledge at hand, resulting in a lifestyle where cold was accepted as a given, rather than an anomaly. From the architectural innovations of later castles to the widespread use of wool and communal sleeping arrangements, every solution speaks to a deep, practical intelligence. This enduring spirit was tested daily by the constant demands of the environment. The pervasive cold necessitated a persistent and resourceful approach to life, fostering resilience that is difficult for modern sensibilities to fully grasp. The very fact that these massive stone structures, often hundreds of years old, housed thriving communities during severe winters speaks volumes. Imagine families living, working, and raising children through countless cold seasons. Their lives a continuous testament to their fundamental robustness. It is this core human trait, the unyielding will to survive and thrive even in challenging conditions, that underpins all the specific solutions we've discussed. The enduring spirit, a combination of collective wisdom and individual determination, was the invisible, yet most powerful force heating the medieval castle through the countless long, cold nights. Our journey through the medieval castle's winter nights concludes with an appreciation for the unspoken story, the silent testament to human endurance, resourcefulness, and the sheer will to survive. It's a narrative whispered through the cold stone, echoing the hard-won sleep of countless generations. Ultimately, the question of how people in medieval castles managed to sleep without freezing to death isn't answered by one single factor, but by a complex interplay of many. It was a constant negotiation with the environment, a meticulous layering of strategies, each designed to incrementally improve the odds of retaining precious body heat. From the thermal mass of the heavy stone walls to the calorically dense diets, from the ingenious use of textiles and furs to the communal warmth of shared spaces, every element played a part. The very architecture, initially uncompromisingly defensive, slowly evolved to incorporate subtle concessions to comfort, acknowledging the limits of human endurance. Dr. Christopher Dyer, a leading expert on everyday medieval life, summarizes this understanding. It wasn't about achieving comfort as we define it today, but about mitigating an inherent discomfort to a degree that allowed for survival and function. True warmth was a rare commodity, paid for in constant effort, resources, and often personal sacrifice. This re-evaluation of medieval life within castles dismantles romanticized notions of lavish warmth, replacing them with a more accurate and arguably more compelling picture of resilience. It highlights how humans, in the absence of advanced technology, leveraged their ingenuity, social structures, and biological adaptations to carve out existence in challenging environments. The echo of a hard-won sleep is a powerful one, reminding us that medieval people were not merely passive recipients of their harsh world, but active architects of their survival. They secured their castles not just against invaders, but against the relentless cold. proving that even the most formidable fortresses in their deepest winter relied most profoundly on the unyielding spirit of those who called them home. And as the sun finally rises, casting long shadows across the ancient stone, we can almost hear those echoes of 1,000 victorious dawns.